All right, thanks you guys for coming out. We appreciate it. Bluntly, we are here to bash the proposal that is repealing the estate tax out of the state of Ohio. That's in the new budget. You know, in Ohio and the United States, we pay a variety of taxes. We pay sales tax, we pay income tax, we pay commercial activity tax. For the very, very wealthy, there's also an estate tax. And in a good economic climate and good economic taxation structure, there's a variety of taxes that we use to generate revenue to provide for the needed services in our states and in our countries. The estate tax is one of the most progressive taxes that exists in our palette of taxes. It's a tax that's taxed on, at least in the state of Ohio, on the wealth generated by estates over and above $338,000 a year, or $338,000 in the estate. The Republican GOP and Governor Kasich today or tomorrow when we pass this budget are playing class warfare in Ohio. And class warfare which benefits their friends who are the wealthiest in Ohio. Basically they're getting rid of the estate tax, and a tax that helps local governments. 80% of the estate tax goes to local governments. And they want to get rid of that to the benefit of their wealthy friends and contributors. Governor Kasich and his GOP allies are participating in class warfare. They're backing the rich. This is one more example of them giving handouts to the wealthy allies at the expense of the middle class and local governments. One of the key reports that the Republicans used in testimony both in the Finance Committee and when this bill passed out of the Ways and Means Committee earlier this year was a report generated by the Ocean Foundation out of Connecticut that claimed that the estate tax was the reason why people out of Rhode Island were leaving Rhode Island to go to other states in Connecticut and Florida and other places like that. That study, one of the major pieces of evidence they had, has roundly been debunked. There's a PolitiFact article done by one of the Rhode Island newspapers that roundly criticized the methodology that was done that used this as a basis for saying that estate taxes in particular are reasons why that affect people's behavior about why they leave states from one place to another. In fact, if you look at the state of Ohio, there's no evidence that shows that the estate tax has any causation on people staying or leaving. A study out of Bowling Green, in fact, has showed that there was a net migration of elderly people into the state of Ohio in 2005. Republicans claim that people are fleeing Ohio because the taxes are dubious at best. As I said, this tax only applies to estates over $338,000. It's only 7%. It's not a huge amount for that amount of money generated above that $338,000 in wealth. In fact, it seems to me that it's selfish for folks to claim that this is the reason why they may want to stay or leave the state of Ohio. There's a general selfishness that Republican backers of getting rid of the estate tax seem to suggest that wealthy Ohioans have, and which influences their behavior on staying or leaving Ohio. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. We have a number of other reps here who will make some statements, and we'll be around to take some questions at the end. Next is Representative Antonio.
Thanks, Mike. My name is Nickie Antonio. I'm the representative from the 13th House District, Lakewood and Cleveland. There's not an ounce of common sense in the notion to eradicate the estate tax, which would take $1 million annually out of the city of Lakewood. These funds pay for essential services that we are already looking at likely to be severely reduced because of the budget cuts already imposed to the local government funds and some of the other policies coming forward. As Representative Foley talked about, this myth that estate taxes cause Ohioans to leave the state, there's also the Ohio historical data has shown that Ohio ranks 4th. We can be proud of the fact that we have the most native-born citizens ranking behind Louisiana, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. 75% of our population is native-born. And one of the things that I've learned in the health committee that I'm on is that our seniors also stay here when they retire. The majority of the people on pensions stay right in their own local community in the state of Ohio. And so the fact that these funds are going to be lost to us to impact the ability of local communities to maintain excellent service delivery, I would say that those kinds of changes to our communities may make people make a decision on whether they want to stay or not. It's keeping a community clean, safe, and healthy that really determines whether someone decides to put down roots in a community, to raise their family. They're looking for things like excellent schools, safety services, and whether or not the community has wonderful parks that they can take their families to. So, my concern, and what I want to say this morning about the estate tax is that our communities can't provide services to keep our cities clean, safe, and healthy for all Ohioans, poor, middle class, and those of wealth. Thank you. And the next person to speak is Representative Winburn.
Well, it would seem to me that Capitol Square is full of hypocrisy instead of democracy. When the governor and the Republicans claim that they're going to give us local governments additional tools, I guess they forgot that they've stripped away every opportunity to use local government and to work with local governments through more cuts. You know, I come from an area that's seen an extremely amount of devastation economically, and we have struggled to keep police officers hired, firefighters working. We found it very difficult to even keep some of the services that we had so readily available in the past available now. And it's difficult when Republicans seem to think that every opportunity that they can give their wealthy friends, they in fact do. So, you know, the elimination of the estate tax is just another shining example of the Republicans placing ideology before sound public policy, individual wealth before equity, and patronage before sanity. The fact that they're crippling local governments so a handful of their wealthy friends can become even wealthier, in fact, is despicable. And they're passing the state's financial hardships off to the local governments, and of course they know it. It's a great way to rid themselves of any legislative responsibility and focus on winning elections. And how will they pay for their millions of proposed spending increases over the next biennium? As I said, Capitol Square, just feeling less like a democracy and more like a hypocrisy.
Thank you. I'm Representative Roland Winburn from the Dayton, Montgomery County area, representing the 40th House District. Repealing the estate tax is only one piece of a broader plan to change the way state and local governments deliver services to Ohio. It is expected that the estate tax will be gradually phased out starting in 2013, giving the municipalities affected time to plan and budget the shortfall. In the meantime, local governments will have to make up the loss in funding, make cuts, and reduce viable services. Ohio is the epicenter of the state's estate tax repeal battle. Representative Jay Hottinger said that in the days and weeks and short months ahead, and how state government and local governments function, what services are delivered, and how these services are delivered are going to be transformed unlike they have ever been in the history of the state of Ohio. But eliminating the tax would be terrible for municipalities, which receive about 80%. Some townships receive up to 40% of tax revenue from this state tax. That amounts to about $231 million in the last fiscal year. Other communities have even more serious worries. According to Montgomery County City Manager, one of the Montgomery County City Managers, only 7% of the state tax returns have to file. The other 93% do not rise above the threshold you have to pay. The estate tax is a tiny source of revenue for Ohio, which only gets 20% of that money. Last fiscal year, the state took in $55 million from the estate tax. That's about 1/3 of 1% of overall tax revenue that was received. Roughly 1 in 14 states have been subject to this tax, according taxation. Without revenue from the estate tax, local governments are being forced to cut services and place levies on the property of their citizens to make up for this projected shortfall. Eliminating the estate tax is a short-term fix. How will this lead to promoting job creation among family businesses? Will eliminating Ohio's estate tax keep wealthy people from leaving the state? Few Ohioans owe this tax, but the repeal backers say that the state would be a more attractive place to live without it. This is a theoretical and unproven argument, and with no compelling database, research, or evidence to prove that, as reported earlier by Representative Foley. I disagree with House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 90, which would shift the financial burdens to hundreds of municipalities. Eliminating this critical source of vital income for community safety, infrastructure, and other local services, including, for example, purchasing a much-needed police cruiser, a public works or salt or fire truck, or paying down debt and fund road repairs and parks is a poor decision with no direct offsets or clear sources of new revenue. In addition to using the resource to leverage federal and state matches. Before eliminating a resource of revenue that brings needed dollars to our community, I ask the legislator and Governor Kasich to consider the implications of its actions on essential services. In closing, let me reiterate, estate tax repeal would be devastating to the quality of many communities and force requests for more local tax dollars throughout practically every community and municipality in the state of Ohio. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Connie Pillage, representative from the 28th House District, northern Cincinnati. You know, for a dozen or more months now, we've been told that Ohio has an $8 billion hole. And I think that if you're stuck in the bottom of a hole, you need to stop digging. And that's exactly what repealing the estate tax causes us. It causes us to dig that hole deeper. The estate tax was created expressly to fund local governments. And now the state is taking away that tool that local governments have relied upon for decades. By delaying the implementation of this repeal of the estate tax, it also takes absolutely no responsibility for the devastating cuts that my 15 communities will experience by this repeal of an important source of revenue. You know, Ohio has the lowest estate tax rate of the 23 states that have an estate tax. Down in Cincinnati, we're bordered by Indiana and Kentucky. I don't know the law in Indiana, but I know Kentucky does not have an estate tax. And I do not see Ohioans flocking across the river to take up residence in Kentucky. It may be because they have a blue uniform on their team, I'm not sure, but for whatever reason, they're not going there because of the estate tax. The idea of repealing the estate tax is the most short-sighted, selfish, self-centered position I've seen put forth in a while. It's just bad policy. It doesn't make mathematical sense, and it's going to hurt my communities. One of my communities, if you picked up any of the copies of testimony here, Springfield Township, they get about $2 million a year from estate tax. It's not a real wealthy township, but this is what they get, and they have relied on this. This is what they use to fund between 38 and 44% of their budget every year. Every year. So let's just slash all that in half so that someone else can go out and campaign next fall about how they cut taxes. That's not good policy. It's irresponsible.
Thank you. I'm Representative Denise Driehaus from the 31st House District, also from the Cincinnati area. I'm actually in Cincinnati. I'm a member of the Finance Committee and was on the Ag Subcommittee where we heard a lot of testimony about local governments and the impacts of what we were doing in this budget, and that was before the estate tax was even proposed. So I want to put this in context for you. So when we were hearing from folks from cities and villages and townships, from the associations that represent all these entities, They were talking about the devastating impacts of the local government fund cuts, which is a tremendous cut and a change in the formula if you look at how that works. We're phasing out, or an accelerated phase out of TPP. There's been an adjustment to that, but in the next 2 years, we will see a reduction in the TPP revenue. The utility tax revenue is also being reduced. So they came in and talked to us about what that means. And they talked to us a lot about how they were being encouraged to use some tools to consolidate. They're already consolidating. They have already been forced to consolidate. This is not new for these townships and municipalities. They're already working together, and we heard that over and over again. I'm going to refer to Springfield Township too, because when we were in finance, we had a Saturday meeting, and so it allowed folks from Southwest Ohio to come up and participate in the conversations around the budget. And we had a lot of folks from Southwest Ohio come up. And this guy from Springfield Township, Michael Hinnenkamp, the township administrator, I'm going to read you a little piece of his testimony because I really think it gets to the point. While the original budget bill contains many negative financial consequences to Springfield Township, the inclusion language to repeal the estate tax will have a devastating effect on our community. As a local government colleague of mine said the other day, if this were a football game, adding the repeal of the estate tax language to this bill is the equivalent of piling on or unnecessary roughness. So, in addition to all of what we already had in this bill that reduces revenues for local governments, now we've got to repeal the estate tax. So, and when you recognize how this impacts different kinds of communities in different ways, these are the suburban communities, these are the highly residential communities, and there's a tremendous impact in addition to the local government fund cut. One other thing I want to draw your attention to, when we asked this gentleman and others what it meant to suffer these kinds of cuts, what's going to happen on the ground, what does it mean in the township, quote, he says, these losses will directly impact the township's police, fire, and road districts. So that's what we're looking at in Springfield Township and all across the state. Thank you.
We'll open it up to questions now.